Our next speaker is Sarah Waheed. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeti. I'm just going to share my screen here. Thank you so much for organizing this important symposium and for the opportunity to offer some reflections on the intersections between past and present of Hyderabad in particular, a project I have only just begun. In December of 2019, Asaduddin Owaisi, president of the All India Majlis-e-Ittihadul Muslimin, hereafter MIM, and representative of Hyderabad constituency in the Lok Sabha, gave a riveting speech against the BJP CAA legislation. Owaisi not only referred to anti-Muslim discrimination, but spoke in staunchly secular terms in defense of India's constitution, while also alerting parliamentarians to the importance of history. Mass protests against the BJP Citizenship Amendment Bill were characterized by Muslims at the helm, leading those protests in 2019 and 2020, auguring a fresh brand of popular secular nationalist politics at the all India level. Owaisi's speech was in defense of a pluralist India. By the end, citing Gandhi's tearing of identity cards in South Africa, Owaisi tore up the new citizenship legislation, saying it was anti-national and intended to break up India. For Muslims of Hyderabad, who constitute nearly 44% of the city's population, Owaisi's MIM party occupies a regionally specific relationship to the politics of citizenship. Its history is also entwined with their sense of belonging, as well as to the loss of a pluralist Muslim princely state in 1948, during the notorious police action, at times referred to by Hyderabadi Muslim writers as Zawale Hyderabad, the fall of Hyderabad. Situated in South Central India, Hyderabad, Deccan, has remained largely hidden from the North-centric historiography of partition. Meanwhile, its past has long been obscured by colonialist, orientalist, nationalist, and communitarian and developmentalist narratives. Indian nationalist narratives across the political spectrum, ranging from left, liberal to right wing, have overlooked, erased, and justified the violent annexation of this pluralist Muslim princely state into the Indian Union in 1948. Hyderabad was the largest and most prosperous princely state in British India on the eve of independence. Its annexation into the Indian Union resulted in various levels of Muslim displacement and dispossession, which continued well past 1948. However, the narrative of Hyderabad as a hotbed of supposed Muslim communalism continues to pervade Indian nationalist history well into the present. Today, there are mounting Hindu nationalist narratives about Hyderabad as the BJP has successfully weaponized history for electoral gain, notably in the December 2020 municipal elections in the city, where the party won 48 seats, a significant increase from its earlier count of just 4. This weaponization of history is apparent in BJP's recent demands to change the name Hyderabad to Bhagyanagar, a demand whose historical origins lie in 1930s communitarian politics. At the same time, contemporary popular developmentalist narratives have tended to situate Hyderabad's 20th century past in relation to the IT industry, telling a problematic story of straightforward progress from a supposedly backward-thinking predatory feudalism to a forward-thinking liberatory capitalism with the emergence of the 1990s of the IT corridor, high-tech city, ushered in during economic liberalization. Muslim narratives of Hyderabad's past have told a completely different story about 1948 and thereafter, in stark contrast to dominant Indian nationalist narratives, but have remained marginal at best in modern South Asian historiography. There is a real need for a historical reappraisal of the entirety of 20th century Hyderabad and its Muslim politics in relation to the political and cultural transformations over the past 70 years. This is especially urgent as memories of its composite cultures, born of a confluence of cultural, linguistic, and regional diversity, Hindu, Muslim, Shia, Sunni, North, South, Telugu, Urdu, Hindi, Persian, are at risk of further political erasure. This paper, which takes up the story of Hyderabad in relation to histories of belonging and the politics of citizenship in India and South Asia more broadly, is part of a larger book project about waves of Muslim migration in and out of Hyderabad during 3 historical periods and across specific neighborhoods. The first being the aftermath of the violence in 1948, referred to as police action. The second being the impact of the oil boom in the 1970s upon the migration of working class and lower middle class Hyderabadi Muslims to the Gulf. And in the 1990s being the third, a transformation ushered in, as I said, by economic liberalization and specifically the IT corridor, together with the expansion of Muslim neighborhoods such as Toli Choki, as many Gulf returned Muslims bought property there and now constitutes a portion of the constituency of MIM. Articulated through the politics of secular nationalism, Hyderabad's longer history of its many peoples and identities can be described as translocal and transregional, and has long characterized what it means to be quintessentially Hyderabadi. There is no one singular identity. In this paper, however, I discuss some of the continuities of Muslim displacement from 1948 through the 1970s and into the 1980s. By 1947, the withdrawal of the British from India was imminent and princely states were given the option of full independence. A year later, most had acceded to either India or Pakistan. Hyderabad's Nizam, Usman Ali Khan, chose independence and refused to accede to India. Hyderabad, as Eric Beverly has argued, quote, represents an attempt to fashion a self-consciously modern state founded on the idea of solidarity with other Muslim states, progressive principles such as inclusion and aid towards all segments of society, and technical and institutional innovation informed by contemporaneous global developments. In his own time, the Nizam was praised for modernizing Hyderabad while keeping its distinctly cosmopolitan Islamic culture intact. The Nizams of Hyderabad not only supported Muslim institutions, but also extended land grants to Hindu temples. Hindus, Shias, and Sunnis were all represented within the ruling apparatus of the state. Moreover, this composite culture was not relegated to elites, but ordinary peoples living in the rural and urban areas who spoke different languages, lived, worked, and worshipped in the same spaces, and participated in each other's cultural and religious festivals. One can see the remnants of this world even today in the Muharram procession that traverses the old city during the Shia month of mourning. Hyderabad has also long been praised for its Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb, a confluence of North-South cultures and Hindu-Muslim exchange. Such sentiment had long been invoked by the poet and political activist Sarojini Naidu in the early to mid-20th century. She made frequent poetic references to Hyderabad's pluralist cultural ethos. Osmania University, the first institution of higher education in India to adopt an Indian language as the means of education, Urdu, in the early 20th century, was, as Kavita Datla wrote, a worldly vernacular, and she spoke of Hyderabad's Urdu nationalism as a form of secular Islam. The violence and upheaval that marked Hyderabad's forced annexation by the Indian state in 1948, a military invasion known as Operation Polo, misleadingly also called police action, qualified as an anti-Muslim purge. A conservative estimate of between 27,000 to 40,000 people, largely Muslim, were killed as a result of the violence at the hands of the Indian military operation in a state where Muslims were constituted as a minority. Looting, mass murder, rape, and property possession of Muslims followed in the months after the first 4 days of invasion. The hidden massacres remain untold in narratives about the partition of India, and facts about them only emerged in 2013 when historians such as Sunil Purushottam drew attention to them in the recently obtained copy of the Sundar Lal Committee report. Upon Nehru's urging, a small group led by Congress leader Pandit Sundar Lal was commissioned in 1948 to investigate military atrocities, but the report had never been published. It is now in the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. However, Hyderabad's Muslims have long told a different story than is narrated by mainstream nationalist accounts and which confirm the report's findings. These narratives go as far back to Hyderabadi journalists such as Qazi Abdul Ghaffar, who served on the Sundar Lal Committee, Elsewhere, in memoirs and journals published as early as in the 1950s, referred to the police action as a khofnak waqia, a terrifying event, replete with narratives by both leading Muslim political elites, while also referring to the mass violence. Internal violence was a crucial aspect of state formation in India following independence, as Purushottam has argued in relation to police action. And the mid-century ruptures of South Asia, quote, were constitutive events through which a new state and regime of sovereignty emerged, unquote. Few histories have grappled with Hyderabad's 20th century past, if at all. According to A.G. Noorani, the true objective of the Indian state's subsequent invasion of Hyderabad in 1948 was not to suppress the Telangana peasant uprising that occurred that same year, a frequent historical explanation invoked, but to dismantle what was derisively viewed by Home Minister Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel as an alien state with an alien culture. Patel had called Hyderabad an ulcer in the heart of India that needed to be removed. Noorani's account narrates events about political elites and negotiations, as well as diplomatic breakdown between the Nizam of Hyderabad, who is criticized for abandoning his people, Patel, who leaned towards Hindu nationalism, the secular nationalist Nehru, who saw in Hyderabad the composite culture of India, and Jinnah, whom Noorani criticizes for not extending any assurance of material support from Pakistan. The story becomes ever more complicated when one turns to post-colonial Muslim politics. Taylor Sherman charts how, quote, a negative and exclusionary interpretation of Muslim history in Hyderabad came to dominate how the Muslims of Hyderabad were governed after the integration, and that groups of Muslims, their self-styled representatives, and those advocating a shared national culture asserted Muslim belonging and negotiated a place for them. Ultimately, however, the central paradox of early post-colonial Muslim politics was that in various fields of official policy, Muslims experienced discrimination, but within the norms of secular democratic India, they could not legitimately organize politically as Muslims to counter this discrimination, unquote. And as Sherman shows, Muslim claims to citizenship in Hyderabad contributed to intense debates over the nature of democracy and secularism in India throughout the decades of the 1950s. These histories have come to a new juncture in the MIM leader Asaduddin Owaisi, a charismatic figure whose nationalist politics speak also in the register of respectability. As Owaisi takes up a mantle of what was once a local or regional Muslim party and turns it into a national one, taking center stage, he undertakes new political risks, even while becoming a spokesman for a secular India. In an overcompensatory move, Owaisi refused to let the student activist Amulya Leoni say Pakistan Zindabad on a stage she shared with him during the anti-CAA protests. Leoni was arrested on sedition charges and had to serve jail time. But Hyderabad, as compared to other Indian cities, has a unique history in relation to the vibrant and ubiquitous transnationalism of its Muslims. This transnational Muslimness, which is also unabashedly Hyderabadi, is coupled with lively assertions of cultural and political sensibilities, at times signaling the possession of a certain confidence in urban public spaces. This is partly due to how Hyderabadi Muslims see themselves linked to the erstwhile Muslim princely state, as well as to the MIM, which first emerged in the late 1920s as a response to Hindu majoritarianism. The hostile takeover of Hyderabad entrenched in Hyderabad's Muslims a sense of profound and persistent loss. When speaking of police action and the violence in particular, stories that Hyderabadi Muslims tell convey a deep sense of trauma. Often they are ashamed to discuss it even within their own families until long afterwards. These stories range from witnessing killings, hiding in homes, drills to be carried out, as well as the displacement of peoples from villages, as well as urban locales and separations within families. Deep traumas are coupled together with a nostalgia for the erstwhile pluralist Nizam state. Narratives of police action have yet to be compiled systematically through oral history, as well as a survey of mid-20th century literature in Urdu and Telugu. As inheritors of an unusual Muslim state in the heart of India, Hyderabadi Muslims also reimagined and reconceived their relationship with India and within the city. Like many cities of South Asia, Hyderabad is a story of multiple displacements, and Muslims fared quite badly. And it is to now the 1970s I turn specifically the context which allowed Muslims to migrate. The 1970s and 80s were characterized by further dispossession of Muslim lands, resulted from the introduction of urban sealing land acts, intensifying communalist politics in the city, and the emergence of institutions which made possible Hyderabadi Muslim migration to oil-rich states in the Gulf. Upon their return, Hyderabadi Muslims used their capital to purchase plots of land in Toli Choki neighborhood, turning it into a new hub of economic activity. In many respects, this neighborhood is a kind of simulacra of the old city, a multicultural, trans-regional Muslim urban center, and yet it is derogatorily referred to as a ghetto. At the same time, Muslim narratives and memories of longing and belonging and sovereignty related to the erstwhile Nizam period of Hyderabad have been increasingly recrafted and repurposed. While long characterized by nostalgia for the princely state, but especially since NRC, CAB, and CAA, there has been a renewed sense of urgency amongst them to document their pasts. Hence the popping up of several social media groups documenting pre-1948 photographs, family memoirs, letters, photos of dilapidated Muslim sites in the city, and so on. Their nostalgic renderings of the past, taken together with material urban transformations of neighborhood spaces, I believe, are useful points of departure from which to reconsider local, national, and trans-regional linkages and forms of belonging. During the 1970s and 1980s, large numbers of working-class Hyderabadi Muslims of the old city faced dim employment prospects. Some anthropological work has reflected on the motivations of migrants. However, the historical processes and context for their migration in the first place remains a missing link. Hyderabadi migration to Gulf states, I found out, was made possible by a jobs training organization in the city known as SETWIN, Society for Employment and Training in the Twin Cities. The initiative was spearheaded and established in 1978 by IAS officer Khader Ali Khan, who was concerned about the economic plight of Hyderabadi Muslims. Khan, who belonged to the erstwhile aristocratic Muslim class with familial relations to the Nizam, voluntarily gave up his ancestral properties to the state and embraced the prerogatives of Nehruvian socialist democratic India. He also acquired a reputation for questioning authority. He worked towards the uplift of Hyderabad's working class and poor Muslims, and to this day in the old city, he is remembered as Baba-e-Rozgar, the father of employment. Setwin's job skills certificates were valued highly by recruiting agents in Saudi Arabia and other Arab Gulf states. Khader Ali Khan's service to Setwin emerged in the context of various political and economic developments during the 1970s. In 1973, the Land Sealing Act was introduced, which ostensibly was a means of introducing land reforms in order to redistribute wealth from feudal elites into the hands of the poor. In practice, this was not achieved largely. That same year, Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, P.V. Narasimha Rao, who had been a very strong proponent of carrying out the Land Sealing Act reforms, left AP politics. He would later go on to become Prime Minister of India in the early 1990s, at a time of rising communalization of Hindu nationalist politics. As for Hyderabad, the Land Sealing Acts continued to be carried out, while at the same time, Atal Vajpayee was External Affairs Minister, and his policies made it easier for Indians to obtain passports. To this day, the urban land sealing acts of the 1970s have been a source of discontent amongst Hyderabadi Muslims, who have pointed to how they have led to further disenfranchisement. While on the one hand, lands of Muslim elites were confiscated by the state, on the other hand, a new set of powerful regional Andhra and Telangana elites, many of whom were from landlord classes under the erstwhile Nizam state, arose in Hyderabad politics. As recently as September 2020, Owaisi argued that, quote, the Jagir Abolition Act, Inam Abolition Act, Agricultural Land Sealing and Urban Land Sealing Acts have made Muslims poorer. Apart from individuals' land, Waqf land and Dargah land were also encroached upon by private individuals and firms. Land government allotted to assignees and agencies have also been gobbled up, and the government did not pay compensation for the Waqf land taken over, unquote. Taken together with the displacement after 1948, Hyderabadi Muslims speak ubiquitously and bitterly about these land sealing acts. In 1976, the very first passport office opened in the city of Hyderabad, which enabled new forms of global mobility amongst the poor and working class Muslim population. A survey of Hyderabad's Urdu newspapers, Siyasat, through the 70s and into the late 1980s shows numerous Setwin advertisements for jobs in the Gulf. In 1978, increasing communal tensions arose in the city of Hyderabad. A riot emerged following the Ramiza B rape case in which a Muslim woman had been assaulted by police for registering a complaint. It was on the heels of such developments in the city when Khan established Setwin. So Khan emerges, right, as this interesting figure for local and regional development initiatives in Hyderabad city, as well as rural districts in Andhra Pradesh. Covered in the Christian Science Monitor in 1972 by an American Ford Foundation representative who referred to him as an exceptionally energetic man, the article went on to claim that he was denied a promotion for going against the bureaucratic hierarchy. It is also very likely, however, that Khan met Indira Gandhi at the National Seminar on Employment, which was inaugurated by her in 1981. I mention him because in Khan, we see a figure who bridges the old pluralist Muslim aristocracy and the new bureaucratic institutions of the secular Indian state. He maintained a close relationship with the AP Chief Minister N.T. Rama Rao and worked with Princess Durreshahwar, a Turkish princess who married into the Nizam's family, known as a progressive princess, as a key patron for philanthropic initiatives and public works in the city. So, it's fascinating because by today in Hyderabad, Muslim transnational urbanism influenced by Gulf capital from below coexists between and betwixt an urban order determined from above by state prerogatives that strive to make Hyderabad a world-class city, though Hyderabad's connections to the wider Indian Ocean world go back much further, even before the 18th century. During the 1990s and early 2000s, the state government under Chandrababu Naidu inaugurated a massive restructuring of Hyderabad to foster it as this world-class knowledge hub of information technology. But at the same time, NRI Hyderabadi Muslims were purchasing new plots of land and building homes in Toli Joki near the emergent IT corridor. In my interviews with them, they spoke on the one hand with pride about their improved economic standing as a result of these jobs, but at the same time expressed anguish about the social and cultural costs of upwards class mobility. Amongst the older generations, there are constant references to the destruction of Hyderabad in 1948, as well as further dispossession of lands during the 1970s. But Hyderabadi nostalgia is also today inflected through a new Gulf-inspired consumerist lifestyle. Thus, there is a real need for cultural and political histories of the totality of upheaval over Hyderabad's 20th century past, the past 70 years following 1948, particularly when it comes to the role of Muslim dispossession, memory, and nostalgia, and the question of Muslim citizenship and belonging in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that very necessary paper on Hyderabad.